Hello, today I'm going to speak to you about how to put autoimmune disease into remission. So first of all, what is autoimmune disease? Autoimmune disease, we're taught in medical school that this is where your immune system is just working so good that it attacks itself. But really it's not so good, it's really confused. And so the question is, what are the elements that we have to look at so that we can turn off this confusion so that a person can have way less symptoms and so that the quality of their life doesn't have to be as much affected. So is autoimmune disease curable? And the answer is no, it's not, but it's possible to put it into a silence mode so that it doesn't demonstrate its effects. So let's talk about some different examples of autoimmune disease that you've probably heard of. So people with rheumatoid arthritis have autoimmune disease, lupus, Sjogren's, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, psoriasis, ulcerative colitis, multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes, irritable bowel syndrome, scleroderma, celiac disease, pernicious anemia, and there's many others as well. But these are all different examples of where the immune system is confused, so the body's attacking itself instead of other aspects of what actually provoked and caused the autoimmune disease. So let's talk about causes. So in order for a person to have autoimmune disease, they have to have the genes, first of all. But how do you turn on these genes so that the body gets confused and then it starts attacking itself? So the answer to that is going to be foods. So there are certain kinds of foods that are very commonly involved in autoimmune disease. Wheat is a very big one. Dairy proteins are a very big one. Large amounts of sugar in the diet is going to be big too. And sometimes it's very strange things that you wouldn't expect. For example, somebody might react to kale or broccoli or asparagus. Also, we have to look at chemicals. As we become more and more industrialized, there's a lot more chemicals that we're exposed to, that the FDA approves, and so because they're not extremely toxic, we're allowed to have a certain amount of them all the time in our daily living. And so plastics and rubbers are things that have a lot of chemicals that people often react to. But also we spray our food. So our food has pesticides, insecticides, etc. on it, and we can react to these things as well. Other chemicals like dyes and things like that are put into foods, these things also are sometimes very bad for certain individuals. There's another thing that we should talk about, and that is pathogens. So many autoimmune diseases have something called molecular mimicry. So what happens is we might get Epstein-Barr virus, for example, and it resembles our own thyroid tissue. So because it resembles thyroid tissue, our body is confused because we don't have enough Treg cells. And so then what happens is that our body starts attacking the thyroid instead of attacking the Epstein-Barr virus. But there's different autoimmune diseases are linked to very specific pathogens. So psoriasis is linked to strep, and rheumatoid arthritis is linked to gingivitis. So if you have poor oral hygiene, that can eventually turn into an autoimmune disease if you have those genes. Also, another very important factor is stress. You know, if you've been in a situation where you just had incredible amounts of stress, for example, let's say that you lost a child or you lost a spouse or a sibling or a best friend, or if you went through a divorce or you were sexually assaulted or things like this, these can just kind of push you over the edge and then put you into autoimmune disease. So again, we're going to talk about the triggers. So the triggers are either going to be foods, and there's special labs that we can do, and Array 10 from Cyrex Labs is the very best one. We're not looking for allergies, we're looking for sensitivities. We want to know if there's an immune response to very specific proteins that you're consuming on a regular basis. Now there are foods that everybody with autoimmune disease just shouldn't consume. One of them is wheat. One of them is A1 casein protein. And another one is going to be pork. Pork is 10 times more autoimmunogenic than any meat that we've ever tested in a lab. Also, you should not have high amounts of sugar in your diet, and you should not have high amounts of salt. If you do have a very salty meal, you might want to add some potassium so that it doesn't affect your autoimmune disease. Also, we should find out which pathogens are actively in your body. So that would be array 12. And there's also another array from Cyrex Labs that it's an Epstein-Barr virus panel. So it helps us to look to see, because Epstein-Barr virus is probably one of the biggest pathogenic triggers for autoimmune disease, as it stays in your system for many years and it creates havoc on a person and takes away a lot of your energy. Also, there's the chemical test it's called Array 11, and we can see which chemicals are you reacting to. There are some people that don't react to any chemicals that we've tested, and some people have very little food sensitivities, but it's good to know which ones, because these are the ones that create more problems. And if you are going to eat these, I recommend taking digestive enzymes so that they can break down the proteins so you don't react to the proteins. So if you have to cheat, if you're on vacation or you're at a wedding or whatever you're at, I recommend digestive enzymes so that you can break down these proteins. And protease 1 and protease 2 and protease 3 are the most important of the digestive enzymes. Also so these are the triggers. You have to remove these triggers or massively limit them if you want to put an autoimmune disease into remission. But another very important thing to find out is which specific tissues are actually being attacked. So that would be array 5. So we can find out, is your own DNA being attacked? Is your thyroid being attacked? Are your muscles being attacked? Including your cardiac muscle. You can even have autoimmune disease that's affecting cardiac muscle, etc. So there's a whole beautiful array created by Dr. Aristo Vojdani that's worth looking at. Another thing that we should find out is, where is the confusion? So this next test is called the lymphocyte map. And the lymphocyte map is very unique. It's only been around for maybe 3 years. But we can look at how much natural killer cells do you have. We can look at how much, are your lymphocytes too high or too low? And can we actually do things to change these things? So we can look at your CD8 versus your CD4. We can look at T helper 1 versus T helper 2. So these are all various aspects of the immunosciences that we can look at, and we can target them with diet and with supplements and things like that can have a very nice effect on your immune system so that it's not quite as confused. Another thing that's very important when we look at autoimmune disease is we should look at the blood-brain barrier. So we can look at what's called Array 20 from Cyrex Labs. If the blood-brain barrier is breached, then we need to do things to make it so it's not breached, because we don't want antibodies from your autoimmune disease actually getting into your brain and causing damage with the function of the brain. We don't want the brain being attacked by your autoimmunity. There's also another test that we can order. It's called an S100B. This one goes to the Mayo Clinic, and the Mayo Clinic will give us back some numbers. The score should be 0 to 96. If it's beyond 96, we know that your blood-brain barrier is breached, and we can do things to actually seal up this barrier. Another thing that used to be talked about like what didn't really exist is leaky gut syndrome. But leaky gut syndrome is real, and how do we know that? We can look at your blood and we can see parts of the barrier in your blood, and if we see that, then yeah, you do have leaky gut. And the best test for this is called Array 2. If the gut is breached or the blood-brain barrier is breached, we have to seal up these barriers and try to fix the leaky gut. And so that would be diet changes, and then there's very specific supplements that work very well to help change this outcome. And I've seen this with patients before and after, and you can really see the result. The consequences of not putting autoimmune disease into remission, really, if you don't do it, if you don't work on these triggers, and let's just say you decide you want to take an immunosuppressant, which is the standard in the pharmaceutical world, then what happens is you develop not just one autoimmune disease, but you might have 3 or 4 in time. And so your body gets more confused, and now more tissues are being attacked. And now we can give it more different names to, instead of just calling it, say, Hashimoto's, now you get to have also, you know, rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's or whatever. There's different kinds of connective tissue disorders and things that oftentimes develop if you're not working on putting this into remission. Now, I'll tell you another very interesting thing that I've seen. I would say that about 20% of people have some kind of autoimmune disease. Some of them are silent, and some of them are full of all kinds of strange symptoms. But I would say that if you want to know if you have autoimmune disease, I would say, first of all, if you've been diagnosed with one, that's good enough, then we can go after the triggers. But if you haven't, but if you have very strange symptoms, then I would start with a comprehensive autoimmune panel from Immunosciences Lab, also created by Dr. Aristo Vojdani, who's the most published immunologist on the planet. But it will basically give you a yes or no answer. Do I have autoimmune disease? And if you do, start putting it into remission. Some clues that we can sometimes see in blood work that might warrant looking for autoimmune disease would be the white blood cell count being higher than 8 or lower than 5. What often happens with autoimmune disease is that when you first get it, the number will start to go high. And then as your body can't handle that anymore, it starts to look normal again as it drops, and then eventually it goes below 5, and then you become immunosuppressed. If a person has high immature granulocyte percentages or numbers, as sometimes seen in a complete blood count with differentials, this is a clue that you might have autoimmune disease. If you have elevated globulins, then another thing that we would consider. Now, a lot of times patients will get an anti-nuclear antibody lab test. If it's positive, you do have autoimmune disease, but if it's negative, it doesn't mean you don't. And so this would warrant a comprehensive autoimmune panel. So I hope that that's helpful for you, and I will catch you next time. All right, have a good one.